Welcome to the College Admissions Process Podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. Go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success. I'm also excited to share my book, Straight from the Admissions Office, a review of my biggest takeaways from the first few hundred podcast episodes. It's packed with direct insights from admissions professionals and practical tips to help students and their families navigate the college admissions process. You can find all of the information in the show notes. Welcome to The Cap, where we are here to speak with college reps and other professionals in the field of college admissions to help answer all your questions and guide you through every step of the process. So if you're serious about college admissions, you've come to the right place. Are you ready? Let's talk about it. And now, here's your host, Dr. John Durante. Welcome to The Cap, the College Admissions Process Podcast. I am your host, John Durante, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome back my dear friend, Ann Marano, who's the Executive Director for the Colleges That Change Lives. Now, Ann did episode number 151, which was released back in August of 2023. And it is so good to have you back. Thank you for being here. How are you?
I am thrilled to be with you again. Thanks for creating the space for the conversation. And I'm living the dream. No better time to be working in higher education.
Absolutely. Anytime you could help students and their families, there's definitely no better time. And I'm living the dream as well. And obviously, I know a lot, thanks to you, about the colleges that change lives. But for our listeners who aren't familiar with the colleges that change lives, can you share an overview of what it is, its mission, and its core philosophy?
Thanks for asking for me to do that. I'm so proud of our history and the organization. And for your listeners, I spent the greater part of 3 decades as a school-based college counselor, and am really overjoyed personally and professionally to be affiliated with Colleges That Change Lives right now. But we are a nonprofit organization whose members are currently 44 liberal arts and sciences institutions, and we got our start in a book of the same name called The Colleges That Change Lives, which was first published in 1996 by Lauren Pope. Lauren was a higher education journalist, writer, bit of a Renaissance man, and an independent college consultant. And he worked with clients across the country. And he was really concerned about schools that were fabulous and doing wonderful things for and with undergraduates that weren't getting the spotlight or attention they deserved. He was really concerned that folks didn't know enough about the power of the liberal arts and sciences as an academic tradition, and that too many students were really stressing out unnecessarily about this process, right? They were relying too heavily on rankings that they were not creating themselves to get to developing their own college lists. And so he wrote this book where he highlighted 40 schools that he thought folks should take a look at. And he spent a lot of time in the book talking about another way to do a college search, and that is to make the college search really student-centered. Those colleges that he uplifted were so moved and inspired by his work and, quite frankly, by being tapped as being extraordinary places that were doing amazing things within for undergraduates, that they collectively got together and started to travel together to spread the gospel, if you will, of Lauren Pope about a student-centered college search, about the power of the liberal arts, about transformative teaching on those campuses, what that looks like, and holistic admission review, a whole number of things, and of course their own programs. And then eventually those schools bonded together to form the nonprofit. So we offer programming as a nonprofit organization to share those messages and even more with students, families, counselors, advisors. But we also, just generally in the higher ed space, want to continue to advance the message about how students and families should really approach this search, how they need to take a breath, that there are more choices than the 12 schools that everybody talks about, which I affectionately call the 12 sweatshirt schools, which is not an official CTCL policy. But our core values really are the liberal arts, are talking about faculty who are focused on teaching talking about high impact educational experiences that are accessible to students, meaning that you don't have to prove yourself before you get to one of our schools, right? You're going to be able to work with a group of faculty and other mentors from across campus that are going to plug you in and direct you to those opportunities that are going to be fabulous for you. And hopefully you'll have that energy and that strength to curate your own really amazing undergraduate experience. Places that have always used holistic admission review, even before it was trending. Places that allow you to discover who you are and give you a chance to work with mentors who can help you uncover your superpowers. So, um, we try to push back against the hype and anxiety in college admissions and insert more joy into the process. I think that we're fairly successful at that.
Hmm.
But our main outreach are programs that we hold nationally and then in collaboration with different partners at schools or community organizations, groups of independent consultants. So, um, that in a nutshell is basically who we are and what we're about. And I'm so excited. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary as an incorporated organization next year, which is really, really exciting. And we continue to do the good work, I think.
Well, you do great work and congratulations on the anniversary. And thank you for the overview. Obviously, your focus is liberal arts and sciences in terms of the schools, but it was also interesting how you talked about how Lauren Pope wrote the book decades ago. And what did he write about? He wrote about the fact that students are stressed out and they're focused right on that small group of schools, which you and your organization work to try to help students think outside of that box. So we appreciate that, and we're certainly going to unpackage that a little bit more as we go on with this conversation, Ann. But our first episode together, as I mentioned, was number 151. That was released back in August of 2023. So since then, Ann, what's new at CTCL as an organization?
So much is new. So as we're approaching our well, at that time, well, yeah, we were approaching our 18th anniversary, I guess, and now we're approaching our 20th anniversary. There have been four editions of Colleges That Change Lives, the book. There probably will not be a fifth edition. Unfortunately, we lost Lauren and
Mm.
a while ago. And the editor of the fourth edition, Hillary Mazel Oswald, I just want to give her a shout out, is a phenomenal human being and writer. But we don't have any indication that there will be a fifth edition of the book. And why that's relevant is the organization has continued to take a look very heartily at the landscape and at the composition of the member institutions, all of which prior to this current year had been named across one of the four editions of the book. So, another way to say that is prior to 2025, any of the CTCL member institutions, any of the colleges and universities that were belonged to the organization, had been named across four editions of the book, and we had been pretty. That was pretty sacred territory. We'd been pretty faithful to that. But the organization took a long view of how the field, how the profession, how the industry, if you will, how higher ed had been evolving and changing, and at the composition of the member institutions. And we realized there was probably room for growth, for expansion, to invite near peer institutions, schools that were mission aligned, that were doing very similar work, schools that had been recommended to us over the years by different stakeholders, counselors, families, college students themselves, the current CTCL member institutions. There was room to take a look at some of those schools that people said to us, hey, how come X university isn't a CTCL? They seem very much like some of the member institutions already. So we launched a really intentional and intense growth process. We did some serious identity work. We did some prioritizing in terms of where we want our organization to go in its next 20 years and 30 years and 40 years. And we put together a very small list of schools to invite to apply for membership. And it was kind of fun to invite schools to go through the process that they invite students to go through every year. It was very, very thoughtful and in depth, and we can unpack that even more if you'd like to. We were very faithful to Lauren's work and to Hillary's work and to our core values. And so, at the end of the day, we did site visits to spend time in community with students and faculty. We talked to alumni of the schools that applied, that made it through the process. And we were really, really excited and are still celebrating the fact that we onboarded DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana, and Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, as the newest members of Colleges That Change Lives. So it was not unlike unlocking or opening the doors to the Disney Vault to go through this process, to invite schools to join. But it was a brilliant process, and we are really, really happy that they are now part of the family. And that would be the biggest thing.
Well, we really appreciate that. I love that you identified that there was room for growth in the organization and you added DePaul and Oberlin. Again, you identified the changes in college admissions and the evolution of it. So, based on that, and how have recent shifts in higher education, for example, like the changes to the FAFSA, the test optional policies, and even enrollment trends, how has that impacted CTCL colleges or how students and their families interact with them?
There is so much going on. And thank goodness for your podcast to help families
Thank you.
stay clear on getting the right, good, transparent information. Because a lot of it is confusing and noise, and folks don't always have access to great sources. So what it's helped us do, I think, is clarify the messaging for families around affordability, around access. Most of our member institutions have been test optional for a very, very long time, even pre-pandemic. There are only two that currently require a standardized exam. I think what it's really helped us do as an organization and as member institutions is really focus on that student centered message and reaffirming the power of choice that students and families have, and to remind folks that there are a collection of schools, CTCL member institutions for sure, and schools like ours that really place the student at the center of it all. That you can find an amazing place to go to school that will be affordable, that will result in great outcomes for yourself. I think that we've doubled down on the joyful message and on the message about return on experience. We spend a lot of time in college admissions talking about return on investment, ROI, right?
Yep.
And rightly so. If you're going to invest your time, talent, and hard earned dollars in a college education, you want to know that at the end, there's going to be some extraordinary benefits or some great benefits that you're going to reap more than you sowed, we hope, right? You're going to get paid back tenfold. But I think for us, it's more important to talk about return on experience. And all of those seismic shifts have gotten people to a place of students, especially, where they are craving community and a sense of connection and belonging, things that our schools have been doing organically and naturally for a long time. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. And I think industry wide for colleges and universities, it has in many ways challenged them to be more upfront and more transparent and more clear about cost and about access to opportunities and access to faculty and campus culture and campus vibe. I mean, that's a whole other show, John, to talk about how students can feel connected and feel a part of, and how they identify resources and find them and use them effectively. So I think it's actually been a good thing for us because it's I don't know that I think we've always been really focused, but it's just given us an opportunity to be even bolder about what we're doing well and why we hope students and families will consider our schools and schools like ours.
Well, you're definitely doing a lot of things well, and you talked about so many different things. First of all, putting the students first. I love that expression, return on experience. You talked about a sense of belonging and that wonderful community that all of your schools offer. You touched upon affordability and, of course, those rankings. So let's unpackage everything one thing at a time. I want to start with the rankings here. And CTCL pushes back, right? And we talked about this. It pushes back against the rankings driven mindset that still dominates much of the college search. In your conversations with students and families, are you seeing any shift away from that focus on prestige?
I wish I was seeing a bigger shift away from it. And maybe we should label that is only coming from Ann Marano. I think that's probably because the headlines are still dominated by the schools that everybody's heard of, right? However, I do see families stepping back a little bit, and as they're looking at that return on investment, as they're looking at maybe financial aid programs changing and or being more judicious with how they're spending their resources on higher ed. I do see them asking slightly different questions around why a college might be a good place for their student. And while they're still considering prestige and ranking, I do hear a lot of students, particularly students, asking more questions about, will I fit in there? Will I be comfortable there? And I think that's tremendous. That's really growth. I want us to take some credit for it as an organization because we've been railing against rankings for a very long time. And not that they can't be a useful tool, but we want folks to be educated consumers, right? So if you're going to use a rankings tool, we want to make sure that you understand it's measuring what matters to you. Because if it doesn't, it's not going to tell you very much about whether or not a place is going to be a good fit. If it's measuring things that you value, whether that's class size, graduation rate, number of Fulbright scholars that the school produces every year, the percentage of students that come from certain geographic or demographic areas, whatever it is that you think is important that you're looking forward to. Could be the number of clubs and organizations, or what kind of clubs and organizations, or how well they did in lacrosse last year,
Hmm.
whatever. Um, Pick your sport, right? If it's not measuring that, it's not going to tell you very much. So I do think that people are being more thoughtful about those sorts of questions, especially as it relates to connection, community, finding my place. And then, John, I think also people are asking more questions about support services and the access that students will have to things like mental health counseling, physical health counseling, religiously affiliated support, or faith affiliated support, affinity groups. Um, and that may be a conversation for another time, but really looking for, will I find folks like me and or folks that can appreciate me and my journey and are going to show up for me in that journey on that campus. And I think that's starting to tussle a little bit with just the straight on rankings. So maybe that's a better way to answer that question in terms of prestige and rankings. Those schools are always going to be attractive and they should be. They're great, you know. They
Right.
they offer tremendous programs. Are they right for everybody? No. And I think people are starting to recognize that just a little bit more than maybe they were 30 years ago.
Yes, no, absolutely. And we talk all the time how there's over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States alone. And there are many schools that are the right fit for students. But to your point, Ann, not every school is the right fit for you. So you really should be true to yourself in terms of what it is that you're looking for, students, and go out there and enjoy the journey and, you know, go through that reflective process and try to find that right fit for you. Now, obviously, Ann, we're talking to a lot of students here. A lot of students are listening. If you could speak directly to a student who has incredible potential but doesn't believe college is quote unquote for them, what would you want them to hear from you and the CTCL community?
I love that you asked that question, and I also love that you use the word reflective. That's one of the things we've asked students to do, and I've done that professionally and personally my whole career, is to ask students to be a little more reflective, which is tough, especially for the frontal lobe. So it's okay. It's not
Hmm.
a practice that we engage in regularly, right? I mean, usually when you approach the college search process, somebody says, all right, you want to stay close to home or you want to go far away from home? Do you want rural? Do you want urban? Do you want big or do you want small? Valid questions, great questions. At some point, they need to be a part of the conversation. What do you want to major in? Well, I'm 17. I got into my locker today. I made it to class, and you know, my lab group did well on its report, so that's a good day for me. What do you mean? What do I want to do for the rest of my life? Like. Okay, we got to break it down a little bit. Sorry, the former school-based counselor is coming out in me. So we don't have those spaces for those self-reflective kind of exercises very often. So that's the first thing I would say to the student, that CTCL would say to the student, like, hold on, let's take a deep breath. First of all, where do we think those messages are coming from? How have you internalized I'm not enough, right? I think there's room for affirmation as well. And so one of my favorite questions to ask students is, have you met you?
Hmm. That's
Like,
a
have
great
you?
question.
Yeah. Right, especially because students think that there's some magical way that they have to shape, form, or fashion themselves to be enough for college admissions. So I like to remind students about the statistics, and that is that the majority of colleges and universities in this country admit the majority of students who apply, and that's a good thing. That means access to higher education. That doesn't mean that a school's not great. And also, side note, John, how twisted is it when a student says, I'm not, despite being them, authentically them, which is enough. That's all they need to do. They don't have to have checked off all the right boxes or have filed for a patent or found a cure for something or founded 6,000 clubs or, sent 9 tons of food over to a country that really needed it. Like, they're doing their deal and they're authentically themselves. How many times
Hmm.
have you met a student who said, "Well, I haven't done enough. I'm not enough. I haven't done enough." And they think there's this very narrow definition of what enough is, right? So I'm getting a little carried away with myself, but I think the main message is, yeah, let's be self-reflective. Let's go back to where those messages are coming from. What is it that you want out of college? Right?
Right.
Before you eliminate the choice altogether, um, can you can you ideate? Can you dream? Can you envision what 5, 10, 15, 18 years from now looks like? Or next Tuesday? You know,
Right.
let's chunk it. Maybe it's too much to think about years in the future. And what you want for yourself. How do you imagine that you would like to live? What kind of community do you want to be a part of? How do you want to engage with the world? Okay, well, how do you sustain yourself financially? And then how do we get you there? Okay. Sounds like it could be some sort of post-secondary education. Now let's unpack some of the things that have been meaningful to you in high school, some of the journeys that you've taken and what you've learned from them about yourself. And maybe you're just getting the wrong messages and not hearing from the kinds of schools that would be good places for you. Because let me tell you about a group of schools, CTCL member institutions and schools like ours, that are so excited to meet students like you, right?
Right.
That read applications with highlighters and not red pens, that are
Right.
looking for more reasons to admit you and to welcome you to this community because you have a lot to share and to bring to that community to impact it and then the world.
Well, I think those are great points. And I love how you talked about many students, and I hear this time and time again with my conversations with admissions representatives from all kinds of schools, large, small, you name it. But so many students are listing all of their activities, and it almost seems like they're just part of the activity because they're checking a box, right?
Yeah,
Someone told them that you have to do this, you have to, send food to that country, you have to do this during the summer, you have to do that. And they neglect the students, that is, they neglect to talk about the why.
right.
Why do you do it? Why does that drive you? And what do you want for yourself? And what do you intend to do with this when you're in college? If you could answer those questions, and you touched upon them all, I think you're going to create a better picture of who you are as opposed to just, okay, I need to do all of these things because someone told me to do it without
Right.
explaining the why. What do you have to say to that, Ann?
Right. I think you're exactly right. I think it's the performative without the passion, right? The
Right,
performative without the purpose, or the performative. I was going to come up with another P. I don't think I can, but the performative without the point. The point of it is, why are you doing it, right? If you spent
right,
significant time in the performing arts while you were in high school, you play the viola. I hope that you did it because you found joy in it. And maybe because when you started you weren't that great and you stuck with it and you got better and you found joy in it.
right. Great
Right?
example.
Yeah, that you curated. Well, you I know that you've, as a school administrator, you've worked with students for long enough to know that sometimes they'll make academic choices based on, quote unquote, what the colleges will think. And I think we know each other well enough to know that our challenge back to a student would be, okay, great, but what will you get out of it? But why would you pursue that, right? Or it's like the box checking thing. I don't want you to curate or to come up with a portfolio that you think is going to make a college happy. I want you to come up with one that's authentically you. I want you to spend time doing things that bring you joy, that teach you things about yourself, that make you feel like in some small way you're contributing to your life and the lives of people around you. That's what's more meaningful. And if you do that kind of authentic experience, right? But there's so much noise out there that says the contrary.
Right.
So that's why I'm glad for conversations like these. If you do that, I promise you, you're going to connect with schools that respect that and understand that. And actually, that makes for a much stronger application and college admissions process and search and outcomes, ultimately. You know,
You're
yeah,
absolutely right. You're
yeah,
absolutely right. And I think going back to trying to put a check in a box, if you are, for example, thinking of a certain school and you're trying to figure out what is the profile of the student that gets admitted to ABC University, and
right,
if you're just putting checks in boxes to try to impress, you're going to sound like many of the students that are applying to that school. And I'm imagining that it's a school that's a very competitive application pool, as opposed to being your authentic self, doing the things that you find joy while explaining why, what was the purpose of it. It's part of your passion, whatever it is. So if you can do that and be authentically yourself, to your point, Ann, you're going to put yourself in a better light in terms of this thing we call the college admissions process. Anything else you want to add?
Exactly, exactly. It's not as formulaic as people think.
Right,
And
right.
every year when the decisions come out, particularly from the highly competitive or highly rejective institutions, and people are surprised, it's like,
Hmm,
okay, what separated those perfect test scores from the 5.0 grade point average with all of the highest academic rigorous courses? It was the way they told their story, and
right,
the way they presented themselves, and the things that they had involved themselves in, and their why, right?
right.
Which isn't something to stress out about authentically. Being yourself is authentically being yourself, but that's not something we talk about often enough, you
Yeah.
know? So
No,
I'm
I
glad.
agree. And and if you are yourself throughout the college application process and you do end up getting rejected, you know what? At least you were authentic to who you are, right? You weren't being disingenuous. And, too bad if, shame on them, I should say, if they don't want you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have to believe, the colleges and universities at the end of the day are a business.
Right.
They have enrollment goals to meet, and they can't, especially the ones that are the most selective, they can't admit everybody who applies. They could fill their classes so many times over with extraordinary students, right? So that denial that I'm sorry there's not space for you in the class of fill in your graduating year should not be the end. That's not the end. It's actually an opportunity for you to embrace the schools that saw in you something that was really going to contribute to their community, and have the space for you, and are celebrating you, really. I encourage students and families to run to the schools that are about that celebration. And I want students to understand that a denial doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you.
Right. And also, sometimes, and it's come up a lot more in the podcast episodes, there are so many institutional priorities. UNC Chapel Hill, for example, they only admit 18% out of state, 6 or 7% of that 18% are international students. The University of Texas at Austin, same thing, but for them, it's 10% out of the great state of Texas. And I could go on and on. The UC schools have their percentages. So, a lot of times you're rejected and you think it's because of you, and it's really not. It's because of the institutional priorities. And another thing that we talk a lot about is that if institutions that are highly competitive, or I love the way you put it, highly rejective, if they could take their first 30%, the
Yeah.
first 30% of the students that were rejected, those profiles, and I think you would agree with me, are probably not that different than the students that were admitted, but because of institutional goals, they could only admit a certain number. So I really appreciate this conversation. I knew it would be awesome, and it really is. Another big piece, by the way, for families, as you know, and you touched upon it earlier, is affordability, which of course is top of mind for so many families. So how do CTCL schools approach financial aid and transparency, and what kinds of support are in place for students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds?
I am so pleased to be connected to this group of schools in terms of affordability. When I was a school-based college counselor, most recently in the great state of Texas, I worked at a single gender school, and most of our students qualified for the Pell Grant and needed quite a bit of financial assistance to make college possible. We did really, really well in terms of identifying financial aid opportunities for them at colleges that change lives member institutions, to the extent that most of the CTCL member institutions were more affordable than the in-state Texas options, including the public universities. So I just want to put that out there. One of the things I'm the proudest of is that the colleges that change lives member institutions all engage very actively in using the net price calculator, which is an online tool that students and families can use to get an accurate idea of what it might cost out of pocket, and otherwise long term, to attend one of our member institutions. So you just need basic information about your family's income and assets, investments. And then there are other questions that have to do with the student's achievements, because there's a measurement included in there for any kind of merit-based scholarships. So that's a really great tool that's available for students and families. But I also love the fact that because we are so student-centered as institutions, admissions counselors and financial aid counselors are accessible and available to students and families to work through any special circumstances that might not present themselves on the traditional financial aid form. So you mentioned briefly with the FAFSA changing quite a bit. There are things that are considered differently than they were 3 and 5 and 10 years ago. There's information that may not be asked for now. The FAFSA may not give a school a complete picture of what a family is working with, and all of our schools are really, really happy and invested in getting to know what the real financial situation is for a family. They may not be able to meet 100% of a student's demonstrated need all the time, but they're also going to get the information to help them determine that, right? Rather than just rely on one data point from the FAFSA. I think it's worth mentioning that most of our schools do not use the CSS profile, which is a college financial aid form used by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of institutions that asks for more information than the FAFSA does, and it takes a 3-year view as opposed to kind of a snapshotty 1-year view of the past. And most of our schools do not use that. They may have their own institutional supplemental form, but that's really, like I mentioned before, to get at the heart of what's realistic for this family, what's the real kind of situation that we're dealing with financially. So I think there's great transparency at our schools, and the admissions officers are admissions counselors, the counseling being an active verb there,
Hmm.
to really work with families. The other thing that I found that was really beneficial for the students that I got to work with who are considering CTCL member institutions is that CTCL member institutions on the whole welcome students who bring in outside scholarships, and that for the most part those will not work against a student in the financial aid that the college is able to pull together for them. And that's not always true. The funding philosophy at colleges and universities in this country, over 4,000 of them, right, are different. Each one has its own funding philosophy. Some schools will take those outside scholarships that our students are bringing to the table and then remove institutional aid. And sometimes that's just because that's their funding philosophy. They're always going to leave a student with a certain gap that they have to fill through summer work or other contributions, or because they just don't have the funds. But the CTCL member institutions embrace that, and I love that. I think I don't know that there's anything more student centered that you can do than to encourage students to shut down on looking for outside scholarships, right? To encourage that if it's something that they want to do and know that it's going to work for them, not against them in the overall consideration.
Yeah, well, it definitely points to the fact, as you said many times throughout the podcast conversation, that you truly are student centered. I appreciate also that you mentioned your net price calculator. And,
Yeah.
for those people that don't know, the more information that you provide in the net price calculator calculation that's accurate, the better the idea you will get in terms of what the actual ticket price will be for the various institutions. So we really appreciate that, Ann. And there is so much that you mentioned, so much that you shared in terms of CTCL schools. So, and is there anything you wish more students, families, or even high school counselors, many of whom, by the way, listened, is there anything else that you wish they understood about CTCL's role in expanding college access and opportunity? Now, you covered so much, but I just wanted to ask this question again.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I just want to emphasize again that return on experience and the great outcomes that come from CTCL member institutions, and that as students and counselors and families are going through this process, we encourage them to ask the kind of questions that get at the heart of that, right? So if there are things that the student is interested in doing, there are goals that they have outlined for themselves. They know that they're headed to professional school or grad school. They know that there are activities, organizations, clubs that they definitely want to be a part of. They've identified some sort of research that they want to do. We encourage them to start with asking those questions at all the schools they're considering to find out, okay, when am I going to get to do that? How does that work? And who's going to advise me on the path to those sorts of things? And who's going to be teaching me, I think is also a great thing. When you look at the top Fulbright producers, and I'm just going to choose that program as an example because I could easily talk about the Watson and the Gilman and other
Hmm.
competitive postgraduate experiences for students that involve research and sometimes study abroad after you've already earned your degree. But when you look at the top producing Fulbright colleges and universities in this country, there are a number of CTCL member institutions on that list,
Awesome.
nearly half of them at any one time, year to year. And so I want students and families to know, and counselors to know, particularly, that there are extraordinary things happening on our campuses that you might not expect because we are smaller schools, that we tend to be smaller schools. I think families, counselors, and students, and it's okay because I used to do this when I was all frontal lobe and 17 and looking at a college seem to conflate or equate, maybe. We seem to equate small college with lack of opportunities, and just the opposite is true, right? It actually means more attention on you to help you find those opportunities.
Well, I like that you said that. Smaller doesn't mean less attention, right? Or less opportunity. It actually means more opportunity, more focus on you. And again, it goes back to that theme of how student focused the colleges that change lives really are. So we really appreciate that, Ann. And before I get to the last question, I always like to ask, is there a question that I didn't ask you today that you wish I had, or anything else that you'd like to share about CTCL or the broader college search process?
I would encourage students, families, and counselors to visit a campus if you're thinking about it. If you can't physically get there, uh, most colleges and universities offer pretty robust now online virtual tours and or virtual programming that you can get engaged in. If you can make it to a campus visit, it's the best way to get a sense of the culture and the vibe of the place for yourself. And so I guess a question would have been that I wish you would have asked would have been, what's the best way to get to know a college campus? But the best way is you can do a bunch of online research. I think obviously pay attention to how the college presents itself on its website. You can look through social media, but take that with a grain of salt because sometimes, you might be hearing from students who may or may not have had the best experience. And so that's not always speaking for the whole group. They can't represent the whole diaspora of students that have had an experience at college. But if you can participate in a program, if you can get on campus, if the your school is hosting college representatives throughout the year or a college fair, go to those meetings. And your school may have its own policy about missing class and that kind of thing. There may be field trips or day trips to visit college universities at your school or a community group, or if you're affiliated with a faith organization that they might be offering. Get yourself on a college campus in as many as possible, particularly the ones you're interested in. But get into the experience of doing that and looking critically at what you see for yourself from your eyes. Like, could I be happy here? Could I eat this food? Do
Hmm.
these seem like people that I want to hang out with or be roommates with? What are the sorts of, again, clubs and organizations that people are involved in? What does it look like at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon? Like, what are folks, or visit on a weekend and see, okay, how quiet is it? Or is it a town gown? What's the town gown relationship like? Are people abandoning campus for the weekend, or are they staying on campus to get even more enmeshed in the community? And to shamelessly plug our summer events and our
Hmm.
programs that happen nationally. So we will be touring again this summer. Always in the summer, we're on the West Coast, and then we're in the Midwest and the Southwest. And in the spring, we're on the East Coast. So if people visit ctcl.org, they'll get all the information about our programs, which include an information session and a college fair that feature the majority of the CTCL member institutions and are staffed by real live admissions counselors
Hmm.
who are really excited about getting to know students. You don't even have to know what question to ask first because admissions counselors are chatty folks and like to get to know students, particularly the CTCL people. So if you just put yourself in front of one of the admissions counselors and just say, "My name is," they'll take it from there. But I would definitely, yeah, get on campus and then get to one of our events, even if well, you might be surprised at what you find. I want students, families, and counselors to come to CTCL events because they are different. They are not your traditional college fair experience at all. I think they're definitely a little more thoughtful and smaller. And we spend a lot of time talking about a student-centered search and how to show up for yourself in the application process. And they can be very affirming experiences for students. So
Well, that's awesome. And obviously, I'll put ctcl.org in the show notes. If there are any other links, Ann, that you want to share with the students and their families, just of course, send them to me and we'll put them in the show notes. And as expected, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Unfortunately, it does lead us to that last question, which is, what are your top three pieces of advice for students and their families as they prepare for the college admissions journey?
thanks. I am going to wrap it up. And some of these things we've talked about, but I really want to emphasize them and highlight them. The first is be you, be authentically you. Walk tall and walk confidently in your own story and recognize that that story has power. and that if a particular institution doesn't honor or celebrate that, it may not be a great community for you. And that's okay, because there are others that definitely will, that you will find that will be fabulous for you. And let you shine through in that application, right? Stay true to who you are. We love your friends. We love your friends' opinions. We love your family and their opinions. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's you're the one that's going. So be you and let you shine, and know that that is definitely enough, all in capitals with glitter and highlights around it. Um, Second thing, resist the temptation to fall into the rankings game. And so push back against the rankings and the anxiety and the hype that's connected to them, and make the rankings work for you. And I'll share with you some other places I think folks can look,
Right.
I think are more meaningful, beyond the traditional ranking sets that people tend to gravitate to. If you do need to rank something, because that's how we are as human beings, that's in our nature to rank things and to look to other people's input. Create your own rankings list. So make a list of the top 10 things that you value, that are important to you, the kind of community that you're looking for. What would make a beautiful community for you? If you close your eyes and you imagine yourself deliriously happy and successful and thriving, what are the things that are making that possible for you? And then rank those highly, and then evaluate the schools you're looking at against that list. And maybe it's the most simple and yet the most challenging, is keep the focus entirely on the student. What it is that the student values, what matters to them, what they envision for themselves, the kind of experiences that they would like to have, the folks they'd like to hang out with. It's all you, all the time, 24/7, 365, 100%. That's at the end of the day what really matters. And if you go into this whole college search process being that self-reflective and focused on yourself, which is a good thing, that is a good thing, that is a good practice, especially at this point in your life, the outcome is going to be much more successful and satisfying and richer because of it.
And those are tremendous pieces of advice. No wonder why you're the executive director of CTCL. They are so lucky to have you, as Uri, throughout this process. And I can't thank you enough for being here, Ann. You're the best.
You're the best. It takes the best to know the best. I'm grateful that there are colleagues like you out there, educating students, families, and counselors and practitioners about the many choices and the power that students and families have in this process, and that there are so many really magnificent, wonderful choices, for all of us beyond the ones that everybody talks about. So thank you for creating the space again, John.
Well, it's my pleasure. And thank you for allowing me to create that space, because without wonderful people like yourself and all the college admissions reps that I've had on, the podcast would frankly be nothing. So again, I thank you and all the colleagues that have been on in the past. And I look forward to seeing you at the next NACAC event.
Can't wait.
Me too. And to everyone out there, take care all and best wishes.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please don't forget to tell a friend, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, John Durante, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the CAP.
Thank you for listening to the College Admissions Process Podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. Go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success.